Hello, everyone, and welcome to Emergency Podcast. I am Nigel Goodwin,
And I'm Ian Bailey.
and I am still, although it doesn't look like it, I am still at the Labour Party conference. Only I am now in a hotel room because being outdoors for as long as I was the other day, sitting on I don't even know, a bollard I think I was sat on by the River
Comfortable.
Mersey. Did nothing for my for my back or any other part of me as well. It's been a big day. It's been a big day, the big day at the Labour Party conference. Judgment Day, some would say, for the big man, for Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, who has been up against it despite his 174-seat majority. He was under pressure today to deliver
Mm.
a phenomenal, rousing speech that was going to see off the threat of reform and all of the other enemies to progressive Labour. Yeah, we're going to talk about how he did. Ian, did you get a chance to
Well,
see the great speech?
I've been scribbling notes down about his speech. I mean, I think my first observation was that it kind of felt like parts of two different speeches cobbled together. Just like that merge in Strawberry Fields Forever by the Beatles, where there's two separate versions, different keys that kind of get blended together. The speech feels like that because he started robotically and then abruptly sped up. When he sped up, I mean, I liked what he was saying. I mean, about complaining about politicians making impossible promises that are outdated, misplaced, irrelevant to the real needs, and you can't play politics with people's jobs and people's services and people's. Oh no, sorry, that was Kinnock 40 years ago. What exactly did Starmer say that's going to be relevant 40 years later? Because I'll be honest, I mean, I might have missed it. You were there, but have I got this right? You weren't actually in the hall. You were watching from the fan zone.
Yeah, I mean they had screens all over. There was you couldn't miss the speech, but you couldn't actually easily be in the room. It is very much a ticket only event. I'm sure if I wanted to go to Kemi Badenoch's speech next week, then I have a feeling that would be easy to get into. I think there'll probably be people they'll have to pay people to actually go in and watch that one. But Labour are in government. They are popular at least within their own ranks, and so yeah, it's pretty hard to get tickets for it. So I watched
Interesting.
it from the outside looking in, and look, I mean, the mood was. It's interesting watching. I mean, it's interesting watching any kind of major conference speech. I always find it really does depend on who you're with, and because I was outside, I was actually in the kind of the exhibition area where the people there, some of them are Labour Party members, but some of them are people
Not.
people people at the exhibition. They are from companies, they are from charities,
Yes.
they're from various other places, and so you know it was interesting to kind of see, are they, did they get the real feel? Because obviously in the room, unless it was an absolutely terrible speech, you're going to be getting a lot of flag waving, a lot of cheering, a lot of, you're awesome, Kia. Outside the room, the vibe was positive. There was a lot of nodding from the people who weren't necessarily Labour members. There was a lot of, kind of, I think, I don't know if it's surprise, but, maybe it is surprise at the fact that it was definitely different to what we've seen from Keir Starmer before, or different for him. We talked the other day about how he's, maybe unfairly characterized as boring. Public speaking's not his thing. He's openly admitted that. He's not a great public speaker. He's not a great orator. He's got better as the years have gone on. I think this was his attempt clearly to um, try to be aggressive, to try to be, again, there's a lot of talk about being up for the fight and that there's a fight on our hands and all this kind of stuff, and fight for the cause
Mm.
we believe in and all this kind of stuff. All very great rhetoric. And I thought he delivered it pretty well overall, but I was still left, as I put all my notes together, I was still left feeling, but is that it? Where's the detail? And I think if I I think if I mention the fact that look, I thought he kicked it off in the right way in terms of look, it's in Liverpool having
Talk about
Margaret
Hillsborough.
Aspinall doing the Hillsborough Law. I think that was a very smart touch. Look, the Labour right now are very much in that they're very organised right now in terms of like they were under Tony Blair and Tony Blair's leadership. They operate well as a machine, and that was just the obvious and smart thing to do. The Hillsborough Law gave them an opportunity to really talk about something good that they have done, that they have delivered, and that links nicely into that concept of change, the fact that they've changed an institutional wrong. It's quite a strong opening, if I'm being honest. But, and I think I've mentioned the Hillsborough Law before on our podcast. It's not something that's going to win or lose you an election. Okay, it's important.
No.
It's immensely important to a lot of people, myself included, but it's not going to win or lose you in an election. What matters is what are the policies, what are the things you're going to do to change this country for everyone. And in the end, there were two things. There were two things that I thought were really good that were mentioned. One had already been mentioned, which was this new NHS online service. Yeah, good idea, smart idea. This is the direction that we should be moving in if we're looking at an NHS for the 21st century, where you can get NHS more NHS services digitally rather than having to go to a hospital or having to queue up and go through all of those delays. Really smart, good idea, great. And the other one was the scrapping of the 50% of young people going to university pledge, the Tony Blair pledge of
Mm.
20 odd years ago, which we've talked about this ourselves in, the fact that there is a problem in this country where we have pushed it, two generations of people, ourselves included, to go to university for jobs that do not exist in this country. And we've ended up with a highly educated population, but there's no graduate jobs for them. And so people end up working for Deliveroo and Amazon and what have you, And so I think that was a great announcement. I think it was a good way to
Well,
part ways with the
what
past.
have they? But what have they replaced it with though? Because they haven't just scrapped it and said let's send less people to university,
Yeah.
have they?
So they've said let's replace it with two-thirds of young people either going to university or doing what he calls gold standard apprenticeships. And that left me, I mean, I was pleased to hear it, but it left me with the question, where are the apprenticeships coming from? Great idea. I'm totally supportive of the idea, but where's it coming from?
Yeah, we're going to scrap the 50% target and increase it to 65, but now include apprenticeships. Well, what's the mix that you're thinking of between
Exactly.
university education and apprenticeship education? And how exactly do you get it so that in the society that we've had, people stop feeling like apprenticeships and learning a trade and learning skills and learning, a profession that can make them for life, right? You can be very, very well paid now with your various apprenticeship style skills. Where's going to be the thing that says we're going to make this cool? We talked about this again on this podcast about we've got to make construction cool again, and at least talking about it, I agree, it's a positive, but it feels like you said. It gives you more questions than it does answers. There were quite large parts of the speech, having scribbled down notes, and we'll get into like comparing notes as we go through this. But there were quite a lot of why and how and where notes when I was going through this, which I suppose you don't have to have all of the detail on a conference speech, but it's about delivering and actually being able to muster some of these slogans into ideas. And I don't know, there were a few bits where I just thought it was the kind of your sloganeering politics that is part of the problem.
Yeah, I can see that. I absolutely can see that point. And I think, yeah, I've got an entire section of my notes which is just titled "The Problem," and it's really the problems. And I think central to this is he's still trying to strike a balance. He is still trying to strike a balance between something that is, this thing is good, but also we need to recognize this thing over here. So For example, it was good to hear him say immigration is a good thing for this country. We should be a caring country that welcomes asylum seekers, people in need. But he felt the need to still talk about the need for strong borders and the need for kicking people out who don't deserve or don't belong here and that kind of stuff. And look, I do have some sympathy for that idea that he needs to
Mm.
balance, but it still leaves me thinking, but now you're still on the fence. You're still in the middle. You're trying to play both sides. Sometimes when we're in an
Yeah.
immensely divisive world, you've got to pick a side, you know? Because the thing is, look, he's the prime minister. He's going to have strong borders because you do. You know, he has to kind of do that stuff. That just kind of goes with the territory. He doesn't have to talk about it all the time, though. Instead, we've had um, a significant amount of anti-immigration, anti-immigrant, anti-migrant kind of rhetoric for a long time now from Nigel Farage and from others. And this was his opportunity to just flip it completely. And he started to do it, but then he rode back. You know, so for me, that striking the balance thing. And the other one is really around investment. You know, he talked about how important investment was, and he listed this whole big list of things that they were investing in, and it sounded amazing in that moment. But then he tempered it with, but we can only do investment within our fiscal rules, within this straitjacket that they've created. And it is a straitjacket. You know, literally all of the things he wants to do can only be delivered
Oof.
if there is growth in the economy. And I got particularly annoyed when, you know, he only mentioned the Tories very briefly, which was quite comical actually. He even made a joke of it, you know, kind of, you know, remember them, you know, that because again they have become incredibly irrelevant all of a sudden, quite suddenly. But yet he mentioned that, you know, we can't be borrowing for tax cuts like Liz Truss did, but then he compared it to borrowing for investment
Which
and
is absurd.
said they're both bad things, which is wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. Borrowing for investment is a tried and tested method that governments all over the world do, and it is a proven way to improve and grow your economy, and that is a problem.
Yes, yes, and this for me is where the two parts of the speech kind of glue together, because
Yeah,
it's obvious that him and his team have kind of said, right, we've got to respond to the crisis that's out there, and there is a crisis that's out there, and he touched on chunks of it, although his response almost to, well, reform are doing quite well, is basically to go, oh, aren't you all a bunch of racists? Repeatedly, racist kept being brought up. So talking about, decency or division. Well, I kind of get the point that he's making there, but you can't win people over by calling them indecent, right? And a lot of people who are leaning on that side now, and Farage has come straight out on the attack and basically gone to his voter base and basically said, he's called you racist. Are you going to put up with that? And you know what? As a defense line, that one's pretty good. But Starmer's then contrasting that with renewal or decline, right? As in renewal with Labour or decline with, with reform. And actually, I think that the problem we've had is most people are decent. Most people are decent. Most of the people who are planning on voting reform are decent, right? Yeah, there's racists in there, but most people. We talked about this. The Unite the Country, whatever it was called, march that Yaxley Lennon had organised. Yes, okay, it's organised by racists, but a significant number of the people on there do not actually believe in all of the stuff that he's saying. And it's the same thing with reform voters. You can't just go out there and label them, because you're then othering them, which is the exact thing you're complaining about them doing to the people that you want to support. And I actually think we are, at the moment, we are decent and in decline. It's not an either or. At the moment, it's both. And unless we're investing, we will continue to decline.
yeah. I mean, I will just pick up for a second on the
Mm.
calling people calling out racism piece. I think that was important, and I actually do think he was right to do it. He will get attacked for it, but I've been saying for ages that he needs to pick a side. He needs to pick a fight. And look, whatever he said, Farage was going to immediately turn that against him. The fact that he came out and has attacked racism, overt racism around kind of immigration, around again painting flags on, the walls of Chinese restaurants
Yes,
and saying go home. It's the right thing to do, and I do,
all of
and
that,
I
absolutely.
and I do think that Hivy, I do think that with continued, again, with more speeches, with more talk around this in terms of, hey, look, we're not calling the people who are thinking of voting reform racist. We are calling reforms policies racist. We're calling Nigel Farage racist and anti-British and those things. And we're aligning these things up and saying, hey, look, Britain is not racist. Yeah, that's what the message needs to be. Britain is not racist, but Nigel Farage is, which means Nigel Farage is not British. He's not a true Brit.
Yeah,
That I get that it's gonna be a problem. Don't get me wrong. And I mean, I chatted to a few people at a conference today and yesterday where there was a lot of those comments around, hey, look, it's not that everybody who wants to vote reform is racist, but everyone who is racist is going to be within reform. It's like It's like what we saw with UKIP
sure.
and various other. But
Yeah,
yeah, so I get that. It's a fine line. It's a difficult one to go through.
it is. It is. It's just that, and look, this is probably my several decades inside the Labour Party, and from mixing with, and obviously you're a member of the Labour Party and have been for quite a while now as well. The tendency to just label anyone who disagrees with you and mentions anything about immigration as racist has always been there, and parts of it just felt lazy because it's deeper rooted than that. Where talk more about you'll talk more about poverty, right? He says we're stuck in a fork in the road as a country. Absolutely, right? We definitely are. Other politicians like Reform offering quick fix miracle cures for these grievances. Fine, I get that. There is no magic wand solution. It would already have been done. But at the same time, he's then saying, well, if we find ourselves defending the status quo that has manifestly failed working people, then they're doing something wrong. But not only is that exactly what they're doing, but he's then capping it off with Britain is not broken. Well, that is the driver behind so much of what's been breaking out on the streets and the flags and the push against migration and so on. It's because people have got genuine grievances at what he's describing in terms of their areas being, visibly run down or whatever. Do something about it then. Do something about it then by investing in our streets and our communities and our towns. And he can't do because he's saying, we've got to stick with the fiscal rules.
Yeah, yeah, that is a really good point. I think that brings it back to that idea of he's still trying to be down the middle of this really difficult kind of this kind of journey that he's taking the country on. And that for me is kind of the main critical problem for him, which is that you can't have it both ways. Ultimately, Britain is broken. But it's not anti-British to say Britain is broken, and yet what he has done is he's conflated these two things. He's basically gone
Yes.
and said, "Well, I need to attack Nigel Farage, and I'm going to attack him as anti-British, but I'm
Mm,
also going to link that to the fact that he's doing down Britain, a bit like the Tories used to do with Labour all the time,
yes.
right? Doing
Stop
down
doing
Britain."
down Britain.
It's like, and he's done the same thing, but now by doing it, he's hemmed himself in because now he can't say that Britain is broken. And it's like, oh man, it's like it. And this is the bit where you're saying it's like two or three speeches cobbled together.
A contradictory.
Yeah, totally, totally. And look, I think, to be positive, because look, it's clearly not easy for Keir Starmer to change the habit of a lifetime, to change his approach. He's clearly been put under pressure by everyone to respond to the situation. He has no choice. I think the attack on Farage, the attack on reform is the right thing to do. We were talking about it the other day in terms of this is what Ed Davey's done, this is what Zach Polanski has done. Ed Davies come out today and said he was pleased to see him taking the fight to Farage as well, and he hopes he sticks to it. That is a good thing. We can debate about whether it needs to be
It's the
nuanced
tone that I'm
way and
concerned
tone.
about.
Yeah, Absolutely. Absolutely. But where he's lost himself is in policy. Where he's lost himself is in how he's actually going to do these things. Because look, it was good that he mentioned the lies of Brexit. He mentioned Farage running away from what he has created. This is the first time we've heard him in a major speech actually say this stuff. It's good. It was good that he brought it back to the 2008 financial crash and talked about these are good things to hear,
Absolutely.
but then he's still hemming himself into those fiscal rules and the order of
Right,
the old
right,
to fix
right.
the
And
problem.
he's hemming himself in with defending the status quo, which has manifestly failed working people. And this is the multiple bits of speech glued together piece, because you've got the let's your G people up bit, but then we can't actually do anything about that. I mean, for me, there's two bits, if I may, there's two bits of the speech that had me scratching my head a little bit and going, hang on, where exactly are you going with this? So, he does his let's do the rally the troops bit. And he probably had something on the teleprompter saying, go faster now than you feel comfortable doing. And he starts talking really quickly about, investing in our NHS and firing up Great British Energy, stand up for British Steel. What else have we got? Rebuilding our schools, new homes, new towns, new train lines, publicly owned, of course. And it's like, these are slogans. When you
Yeah,
actually start picking at some of these, there isn't really any substance behind it. Even the new towns and new homes bit. Well, new homes, not anywhere near enough new homes are being built. And they're way behind the plan, and frankly, it's going to slide even further away. Nothing's being done about planning, which is a key part of this. You can't build anything if the planning system is still broken as it is, and they're not actually going and changing that, going out there and really trying. He says, we're going to push apprenticeships. When? Because it needs to be integrated into a plan to say to people, hey, so instead of going off to university, go to this massively new expanded further education college. We're going to teach you plastering, becoming an electrician, plumbing, construction, bricklaying. We're going to build Britain together. And then we've changed the planning laws, and we're going to go out and do this, and we've empowered the local housing authorities, and suddenly, I get it, a plan for Britain. We're going to build this new town, this one, this one, this one, on the land that we already own, planning permission's done, army of new workers, off we go. None of that is there in the policy substance. Instead, we've just got a throwaway line about we're building new homes and new towns. And that's the bit where it kind of, I think it has wound me up a little bit. And then he wraps the thing up right at the end and says, the purpose of this government, end decline, reform our public services, grow our economy from the grassroots with resolve and respect. With a flag in our hand, we'll renew this country. It's like, it's just words.
yeah.
It's just words. And that's the frustration.
So, and again, it is, and you're completely right. And I had the same feeling as well that there's a lot of slogans in here. And it is also right to say that these speeches are often light on policy, but then the policies have to follow, right? So look, the next month is critical with these things, right?
Yeah,
It's like
it is.
if what follows this speech is a slew of announcements about how they're going to set up more technical colleges and opportunities, they're going to work with, they're going to, I don't know, they're going to triple the apprenticeship levy or something. They're going to do all these kinds of things to really drive apprenticeships. Then we can both get on here and say, okay, we were wrong. It's like, yeah, cool.
Absolutely.
Good on you, Keir. You're following through. If for the next month him and his party and his ministers continue to just rabbit the same slogans, just repeat them time and again, then
Treasury orthodoxy, and we
and
can't
Treasury
borrow
Orthodox, and we get to the budget,
the budget.
um, and sorry, and Rachel Reeves announces, "Oh, it's tough right now, and we're going to have to raise taxes here, and we're going to have to do this here, and we're going to have to we're all in it together." Then we know we've got a major problem on it, or they've got a major problem on their hands. And look, while these speeches are light on policy, or can be light on policy, it is an opportunity to announce certain things and right certain wrongs, right? He started with righting a wrong. The Hillsborough Law was a great
Absolutely.
a great opening.
Great opening.
There is another wrong he could have righted in this speech. And everyone thought he was going to, because they talked about it on the run up to this, and that was the two-child cap. And it was not even mentioned. He mentioned getting children out of poverty, but he didn't mention the two-child cap. And that to me tells me that this is a financial issue still. They can't remove it. They're not going to remove it because it breaks the fiscal rules. If two-child cap still breaks the fiscal rules, then how the hell are they going to fix all the other things they're planning to fix?
We've talked a lot on here. Everything you've just said, absolutely spot on. And we've talked, the wrapper around it is the vision thing, which we talked about at length on here. And I started off by parodying it by quoting the Kinnock speech from 40 years ago. And Kinnock went on, and even after attacking his own party, and look, calling people out for doing bad things as he did, right, and as Starmer's trying to do to Farage, absolutely right. But from a tone perspective, you've got to absolutely nail it. And for me, there's just an element of... But Kinnock then went on, and he's standing up there, and he's basically saying, look, this party gave me every opportunity I've ever had in life, right? From moving out of I think, as he put it, damp-infested rooms into a decent home built by a Labour government, and Labour council and all the rest of it, and then his education as long as he wanted, and doing all of the rest of it, right? His vision was literally, we've got to win an election so that we can then do the same things I had for everybody. The vision thing. With Starmer, under the cosh as he has been, I just think there was this opportunity to actually put out there and say, look, this is my life. These are my chances. This is my vision for your life and for your chances, and how we've got to go and do this. And you're having Renew Britain as a slogan and talking about, decline, or renewal and all the rest of it. Great. But unless you're then actually going to do the big stuff behind it, unless you've got the vision that's driving where you're going, it's just slogans. I think we've both touched on it. Here's the fear, right? The fear thing is we're going to have another, 6 weeks or so until the budget. And then when we get to the budget, what we're going to have is more tax rises and more service cuts, right? We're going to have more tax and less investment. And I really do think that that's where we're going.
Yeah, I mean, and that is the danger. That this this is the biggest problem he has faced. He is now in this makes or breaks his premiership now. Now, look, I have my opinions. I know you do as well. I wrote down in my notes, is it too little too late at this stage? Because to be completely fair to him, and I always try, look, you said it the other day as well, it's like we want our governments to
We want him to succeed.
We want, like, every time there has been a new prime minister in this country, a new leader, as much as I have had my doubts with a lot of them, I have still wanted them to succeed. And I've often said to people when I've been getting into heated debates about why I dislike a particular prime minister, I've often said, look, you know what? If actually this person makes it work, I will come back here and I will hold my hands up and say, you know what, I was wrong. I'm happy to admit I am wrong. If Boris Johnson had made Brexit work, I would have happily admitted I was wrong. I want Keir Starmer to succeed. I'm just worried that he's so unpopular now and he's so stuck in these fiscal rules, this straitjacket they've created for themselves. There is no way for him to get out of this now.
Let me give you an example as to, going across party lines and supporting the right things to do. I remember vividly driving away from work, like in the early days of COVID, because we were a food manufacturer, we had essential worker provisions and all of that kind of stuff. But a few months in, basically, it was becoming increasingly difficult financially to keep the thing going. And I remember driving away with Chancellor Rishi Sunak on the radio announcing the furlough plan, right? We are going to stick a load of money into basically business recovery loans and we're going to fund furlough. I practically cried once I stopped cheering because it's like, my God, someone actually gets it and is prepared to rip the rule book up and do the thing that's needed to fix the problem. And with the greatest of respect to the long list of, actually, I think we're quite good, really, because we've done school breakfast clubs and we're now going to do more school breakfast clubs. There's just not enough oomph there. You're absolutely right. Is this enough to save him? I really suspect that even as we finish recording this, the commentary at Vultures will be circling.
Yeah. No, totally, totally. And I we started all of this because we were talking about how we are in a position in history right now. We are in our country's journey that is maybe not unparalleled, but is relatively unique, right? We are at a very, very serious point in our history. The last time we were in a position like this was at the end of the Second World War, okay? And there were lots of people at the end of the Second World War who were arguing that we cannot go crazy. We need to go back to what we had before. We need to rebuild Britain like it was before. And the country rejected that. They rejected that with the elect with in a general election in 1945, and they rejected
There
it
you have a
because
landslide.
yeah, because Labour had, and it wasn't Labour who put forward the idea. It was William Beveridge who put forward the idea, but Labour adopted it because they recognised that it was a time of crisis, a time of immense upheaval is the exact time to make the big bets, to make the big changes. And that is why we started this. We started talking about we need a Beveridge report for the 21st century. There are other people out there who have a very similar passion for this. What Keir Starmer did today was he did a quarter of the job he had to do. He took on Nigel Farage. And in that, I am supportive. Absolutely. They've got to start hitting him just the same way that Ed Davey did. He talked about a vision for the future of Britain, and it was a part of a vision, right? It was the most I think we'll ever get from Keir Starmer, a man who doesn't like vision. But then it came crashing down because there is no big idea on how to make things work, other than the fact that he wants to reclaim patriotism for the majority and take it away from racists, which I'm supportive of, but that doesn't put food on the table, okay? It doesn't create jobs. What he needs to do is take on the racists, take on the populists with ideas that are going to create jobs and opportunity, and to use that great Tony Blair term, aspiration, and create aspiration for all.
Yes, because with the greatest respect to it, we are talking about communities who have been left behind and left to crumble for
Yeah.
several decades
Mm.
now.
Yeah.
They are not okay. So at the moment, the focus has become there's too many migrants. In quite a lot of the places, there aren't actually any migrants where they are, but they're reading it somewhere else. But the idea is that the migrants somewhere else must therefore be taking the resources away from my town where the weeds are now growing up out of the unmaintained pavements and where everything's shut. The way to solve the problem with sorry but you lot are racist isn't to go after the racists, it's to go after the decay, right? The renewal or decline bit. Well, do the renewal bit. That's the bit that's missing, but he's not going to do any of that. There's nothing in the speech that says he's even going to think about doing the street level renewal that I've been talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
And as I say, I really do suspect with all of the stuff talking about the fiscal rules, we're going to get to a budget where taxes go up and spending goes down. And I know there will be people saying, well, we've got to cut the deficit and so on. Fine. So stop wasting some of the money that we are doing on some of the wasteful competitive structures that we've got. You could shut some of these things down faster. But what we're not doing, we're not going to drive the growth that he kept talking about growth. So once again, Liz Truss was right to talk about growth, right? Liz Truss was right to talk about growth. Wrong on everything else, but right to talk about growth. But you're not going to get growth with more cuts. And I don't know how else to say it, but
Yeah.
we're going to get more cuts, aren't
Yeah. Which again takes you back to the idea that we are still stuck in the rules of the past, and despite the fact that Keir Starmer said we've got to learn the lessons of the past, he's not learning the lesson here. And I think if he's under this kind of pressure with the most unpopular prime minister since records began, with a government that is trailing heavily in the polls, that is clinging on to the idea that the Tories are irrelevant and Reform are too new, and so that will hopefully see them over the line. It's not enough. If this is his answer to you're under the biggest pressure and it is the biggest crisis since you became Labour Party leader, then this is not enough. And maybe maybe we're being unfair. I don't know. Maybe over the next few days there's going to be a slew of announcements. I don't know, but I doubt it, and that is the problem.
Let me put a hypothesis on the table. We're not hearing the things that we're complaining about not hearing about, because in the McSweeney Roundtable, which is the government, they actually think they're doing a great job. There's parts of his speech where he's talking about, building foundations and making progress and doing the right thing. And I've heard it from a couple of, obviously you at the conference, so you'll have spoken to a lot more Labour Party members over the last couple of days than I have, but speaking to some at the weekend, people genuinely think that, all right, so things aren't going fast enough, but we're doing quite a lot of good stuff. And you think, it's just, you're doing a great job pouring the cups of water onto the raging inferno, right? You're putting that flame out, but you're not putting out the fire.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I mentioned denial, while I was in the conference, that there's a lot of that going around. And I'm probably being a bit overly fair, sorry, about this, that I do understand it to a certain extent because we are in such a unique time. And look, if we go back through history, if we go to any government that was a year and 3 months in, and there was some bad news because things weren't going great. If you go to the coalition government in 2011, 2012, they were not very popular. It wasn't as bad as this, right? But they were not very popular at that time. The Labour government in 99, 2000, it was the sheen was coming off to
2000. Yeah, it was. Yeah, absolutely. I remember that.
People were
Fuel
turning
strikes.
on. It was they were the popularity was really starting to decline, and within the echo chamber of the party there was that feeling of, well, if we just stay the course, if we just keep doing what we're doing good work, and people will see it in the end, and that's
Hang on,
okay.
hang on, hang on. Hold on,
Yeah.
hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Sorry to interrupt, but there
No,
is a
no, it's okay.
major difference. A major
Yeah,
difference
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
the coalition government had set out on a course of the economy is quite literally on its last legs because of the financial crash, and we have got to make significant savings, and that is our initial program, right? Make significant savings up front so that we can go and deliver. So a couple, 15, 16 months in, they were still in the midst of that and saying, here is our plan. We are working on our plan. Blair's government, as you say, things got really unpopular, a few years in, but even by then, had already gone out there and delivered very significant chunks of the plan, whether it's Bank of England independence or referendums in Wales and Scotland, or trying to do things on the House of Lords, or going after international hotspots, whatever else. The Thatcher government, right, the one that was seen as not doing as much as some of the ones that followed, the 79 government. So let's go into 1980, and she's crashing the economy because of her monetarism and doing all the rest of it. But again, here is my plan, here is my vision, and I am doing it. So the stay the course thing for any of those governments is fairly straightforward because we know what the course is. I still don't know what Labour's course is in this government. And I think this is a lot of the frustration and the concern is it's not that they're not going fast enough, it's that I think they're going in the wrong direction.
Well, or they're going in multiple directions, right? That's the other thing. They're pulling
They're
it.
trying to go in
Yeah,
multiple directions and going
they're,
nowhere.
they're all pulling in different directions. Look, and that is the reason why I mentioned those other governments, right? Because to be fair to people, because this is how it's always worked, I can understand why some people in the conference, in the Labour Party movement, will be thinking, well, yeah, but if we just keep going, it'll all work out in the end, because it did for all these other governments, right? Except, as you pointed out, they all had a direction they were going in. Whether we agree with the direction they were going in or not is irrelevant. They had a plan and they were going in a certain direction, and that's why ultimately it paid off for them. That and a Falklands War for Thatcher helped a little bit as well. But
No, no, hang on. From a timeline perspective, the Falklands War was 3 years in, and we're a year and a bit in. So hang on. Let's
Absolutely,
we're
absolutely.
into
Look, I'm not recommending a war for Keir Starmer to save his bacon either. But the other problem as well that Keir Starmer has, the other problem that Labour has right now, and the Labour movement have, is that they've not recognised the way the game has changed. Okay, I think the feeling I get, and I've been guilty of this. I was guilty of this around the Brexit referendum and stuff like that, of seeing it as a right and left thing, as a Tory and Labour thing, when it was a very different thing, and we all learned a lesson there. I don't think a lot of Labour people have recognised that reform have not replaced the Tories. That is the view that they've taken. They're like, the Tories are now dead, and our new challenger is reform, and they're a right wing, effectively a further right version of the Tories. That is not the case. A lot of their policies are very right wing and they're very populist and everything else, but their appeal is broader. Their appeal is getting into the working class and people who are effectively Labour voters. That is that, and the fact they don't see that, they don't recognise just how big the challenge and the threat to
yeah.
Labour's base
Well,
is.
yes. And I'd go to put a little bit more understanding of that for the people who don't get this and haven't experienced this. I think there's this perception that, as you say, you've got binary left right in politics. Well, it's never binary because the Overton window, the boundaries of whatever else is constantly moving, either leftwards or rightwards, or expanding and contracting. So where left isn't where left was 3 years ago, or right, it's the same thing. But also, so many of the traditional working people and it was interesting he's calling them working people and not working class, which I agree with, because I think class is the wrong definition. It's about, people who actually have to go out and graft. But the point is that so many of the traditional Labour votes are and always have been socially conservative,
Yeah,
really
it's very
socially
true.
conservative. And I've worked with people when I was in the Labour Party who fundamentally didn't get this. The whole metropolitan elite thing that Farage throws around resonates with so many of their new voter base for precisely this reason, because the elites within some of the other parties simply have no clue how these people live their lives. It's like listening to Jarvis Cocker singing Common People. You've got no idea how people live. There's people within the McSweeney cabal running Labour who haven't a clue what it's like living in some of these ex-Durham coalfield towns where you're now seeing some of these horrible videos on doing the rounds on TikTok where they're shouting racist abuse at people, right? They've no idea how those people live their lives. And I'm not trying to excuse racist abuse, but the reason why Darren Grimes, the ex GB News guy, who's now an elected councillor in the County Durham coalfield, he makes this point. He's like, you have no idea who we are, or how we feel, or how we live, and until people actually start to connect to them and understanding what their communities need, there is no way out for them. And just as the Labour failed, the Tories took over and then failed. Labour had been given another chance and basically have failed. So of course it's then well, who else is there? It's not
Yeah.
about left and right, as you say.
No, no, exactly. And I think that is, and it's concerning to hear you say this because obviously you were a Labour Party member for a lot longer. You worked within the Labour Party and the Labour movement for
They don't
a
get it.
long time ago, and the fact that they're still struggling with this, and this is the bit about when you mentioned Morgan McSweeney and the fact that a lot of people within cabinet are probably feeling that they're doing a really good job. This is, I think it's wider than that because of that echo chamber and because of that lack of dissenting voices and because Keir Starmer, we mentioned this on the last podcast we did, Keir Starmer has done more than any other Labour leader and possibly any other political leader in either of the main two parties to completely destroy dissenting voices getting anywhere near him. And that is a massive problem because yeah, it's taken all of what we've talked about over the last few weeks. It's taken the collapse of his popularity, of his government's popularity, it's taken the rise of reform, it's taken all of this negative press, all these scandals, it's taken all of this for somebody in the inner circle to walk up to him and say, you're going to have to come out and be a bit tougher here. You're going to have to take Farage on. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to talk about vision as much as you don't like to. You're going to have to do these things. But even then, it's still not enough. And that is the point where you've got to kind of say, well, look, for me, it just brings it back to where we've been for certainly a few weeks now. I think you've been there longer. I think I've finally got there over time, which is that Keir Starmer's not the man for this fight. He is, I think he's a decent man. I think he's a good person. I just think he's the wrong person for this job. As you pointed out the other day, the accidental PM. We don't need an accidental PM right now. We need the person for the job who understands the people and the anger they have and the problems that this country is truly experiencing.
Now, just as you were saying that, I started thinking about, so who comes next? I know we talked about this briefly last time, but let's not talk about potential candidates, but there's a type of person. And I think, like, bizarrely, why is Nigel Farage popular with so many of the, these working people, as again it was put today? And it's because he is the person that you'd most like to have a pint with. And look, one of our Lib Dem councillors in Liverpool was at our conference last week and was interviewed in the media talking about this. He said, look, people like Farage because they think they can have a beer and a ciggy with him and he's a bloke, right? And listen to what he's saying. He's a bad person. But the point is, right, that is just basic people skills that so many of the other parties, including the Lib Dems, we don't really do that. Sir Ed Davey is very nice, but you wouldn't want to sit in the pub having a beer with him, probably. It's certainly not over Nigel Farage.
It is true. I'm smirking and I'm laughing a little bit, partially because believe me, I would definitely not want to have a pint with Nigel Farage in the pub. But I
I
do.
would. It'd be fascinating.
Maybe that demonstrates the kind of metropolitan elite I've become, or something. I don't know, but no, I get it. I do get it. I think it's because he does exude a a different type of.
You can't act for that long if it was an act. He's just got this everyman vibe going about him. But the question I was going to ask is, right, so thinking about that, if it's not Starmer, then who is it? There's lots of talk of, well, Andy Burnham this, or, hell, Lucy Powell gets mentioned, Angela Rayner, whatever. Miliband apparently is very now high up the list in terms of who could possibly try and step up. I actually don't think it's about electing somebody from working people background. And you do get this sometimes where, and Lee Anderson from Reform keeps doing this. Well, I'm working bloke and no one's listening to me. Well, they are, right? The truth of this is class still matters. I said I don't like the term working class, but class still matters and accents matter, right? And people want to listen to the people who probably don't necessarily sound quite as earthy as them, right? But can at least relate to their lives and to their existence and what they actually do. So I think as much of that is actually paying some attention to it. And you said about, that we both said about your metropolitan elites, and I mentioned the McSweeney cabal. It probably isn't a cabal, but hey, whatever. Politicians need to get out and speak to people in towns. And look, one of the things that I watch quite a lot of is other people doing this kind of thing. John Harris of The Guardian has had this long-standing series where he takes himself on the road and rocks up in random left-behind town and just talks to people. And he's interviewing. And he might push it back on a couple of little things, but he's like, let's actually understand what people are thinking. And it's an exercise that, needs to be done, because genuinely, we are going to be at a place where it almost doesn't matter what the party is, or whether you think you're left or whether you think you're right. And believe me, the Tories are going to have the exact same problems at their conference and so going forward. It isn't, as you said, it isn't a left or right thing. I think what people describe as populist politicians, right, is politicians who actually do people, right? Boris Johnson, amazing populist politician, but he was a conservative, right? But people loved Boris because of the flaws, because of what he was getting wrong, because he was a bit bumbling and he was whatever. Despite the fact that, again, Boris, very, very, very elitist. Listen to the things that he said and quoting classics and using ridiculous words. People might not have understood everything that he was saying, but they liked his style because they felt like he was talking to them. And honestly, I don't know, and this is the point for the Labour Party, I don't know who there is inside the party who's got that. Because we talked in the past about, Clegg had it and Blair definitely had it and maybe a bit of David Cameron as well and Boris certainly. Who within the Labour Party's got it? Who within
Yeah.
the Lib Dems?
No, you're completely right. It's an ability to be sincere and principled and connect, right? And look, and we've said this. I hate, I hate bigging up Nigel Farage, but his biggest quality is that he has a principle. He has a set of principles, and he has stuck to them. And whether I think that those principles are racist or xenophobic or horrible or whatever else, the fact that he has stuck to his guns on things is something that people do respond to. Again, they just do, and I can get annoyed about that. And this is part of the problem within the Labour movement as well, within the Labour Party. People get frustrated about it, and because they don't understand it, they then don't like it. And that is the bit that people all major political parties are can be elitist. They are elitist by their very nature and how long they've been around, and it's very closed off, right? I talked about how the sense I was getting in the conference and also outside of it, when I chatted to protesters. And there were both Sunday and Monday. I stood outside. Sometimes when I was walking in, I would stand outside and just be chatting to some protesters. And sometimes I was stood there for like an hour, and I was watching as all these other people were just walking past. They'd be smiling and maybe laughing at some of the funnier characters that were kind of dressed up and stuff. There was no engagement. And I kind of thought, well, hey, look, I'm just a jobbing Labour member, right? It's like I am not anyone of importance in the Labour Party conference. But I took a bit of time out to stand and talk to people, and that is what needed to happen. And I couldn't get that thought out of my head every time I was in there. It's like, how many of these people who've come into this event actually took the time to just have a 5-minute conversation with a protester? These are the problems. And look, it's not my job to do that. But if you want to be a councillor, if you want to be an MP, if you want to serve your country, you need to connect with these people, as uncomfortable as it is. And look, I had some pretty uncomfortable conversations with people that I fundamentally disagree with, but I was still willing to have the conversation and at the end, shake their hand and say, we're not going to agree on this, but I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me. You've got to be able to do that.
So I agree with all of that, and I think actually there's a nice wrapper to put around this, and then probably stop because looking at the time, this episode is quite a
We've been on
long
a
one,
while.
but the Labour Party, the conference has been quite big. But look, in the past, right, as a progressively minded person in progressive parties, it's quite easy. You were saying about left, right. The other division is progressive versus
Yes.
recessionist, divisive, whatever you want, regressive, however you want to put it. I thought that there were significant parts of the Labour Party, and part of the reason why I ended up leaving was there were significant parts of the Labour Party who thought that they were progressive and that people who were standing against them were somehow against progressive politics and therefore are on the other side. The Conservatives, and I think they're next, they are definitely in that place where, although it's quite a broad church, ultimately, they know they are self-righteously right and everyone else is wrong. And they're going to get a battering next weekend because I'm expecting a slew of defections just to answer the fun anyway. But look, their conference isn't going to go well. The Lib Dems, we've got progressive policies, but there's parts of the party and the organisation just too nice to actually want to go out there and try and label somebody else as you're not progressive enough or whatever. And Reform are definitely in that place of they're labeling other people, but they're not going to go out there saying that we're absolutely right about everything. They're saying you are right about everything and we're just reflecting your views. So is the divide now not left or right, but it's progressive versus regressive, but the progressive politician, regardless of party, is one who can, as you said, go out there and speak to people they disagree with And I'm not saying that Reform are necessarily good at that, because they're quite good at saying you're wrong, but they're actually out there talking. They're talking to the voters that nobody talks to. They're talking to the people that no one wants to accept exist in the towns that they want to forget about. And unless you can actually reconnect with people, then this whole conversation and the channel and trying to stop Farage becomes a waste of time, because people will just go, well, you're listening and you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point to kind of wrap it up on. I think that the the ability to connect to people is more important than ever. I think we lost a lot of that, and maybe that's a problem that all of the big political parties have, and I don't know what the solution to that is other than what you've just said, which is about connection. Politicians have got to learn to connect to the people outside the fence. Um, yeah.
Best way to try and connect to people in 2025 is social media by doing shows like this. So please subscribe if you haven't done so already, so you can connect to Nigel and myself. See, that's almost professional.
Perfect. Perfect. And look, I think this goes down as our first hour-long episode. If
Lord.
you manage to watch the whole episode, people, you deserve a special pat on the back. We'll, connect with us in the comments, and we'll send you a big like. But yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you, Ian, as always. We'll
And to you.
we'll do it all again. We'll see if Keir Starmer is going to announce a slew of amazing policies off the back of his speech. I'm not going to hold my breath on that.
It would be nice. All right. We'll see you again. Thanks very much.
Take care.
Bye.